Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending another session of the Digital Accessibility Bootcamp for designers, developers, policymakers, educators, and persons with disabilities. This is the 8th and final session of the Digital Accessibility Bootcamp. It has been my pleasure to host you all and to see everyone participating and interacting in all of the different sessions that we've had so far. Today's topic is going to be on the business case for accessibility. And the reason why I'm doing this is because essentially the business case is critical for us to move forward, because one of the challenges that we have as persons, as business persons and trying to get support for projects is that you have to develop the business case in order to show how your project is going to be sustainable. So I'm going to share a little bit more about that as we proceed. So before we begin, as per usual, I just want to share some acknowledgements. So thank you to Ms. Bernadette Lewis, Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, for her support. She has been there guiding us and helping us in many different ways, and she has sponsored the trip to the M-Enabling Summit that I went to in June of earlier this year. So I just want to acknowledge her support. And to Dr. Beverly Beckles for opening the doors of the NCPD to allow us to come to the NCPD for the field trip, where we could have learned at their IT lab all the different technologies and assistive devices that they have that would be helping their students. And we also understood a little bit more about how persons with disabilities are able to use those technologies in order to do their work. And throughout this entire bootcamp, we've been looking at the different methods that persons with disabilities use to access the internet and other assistive devices, and how they have been able to help them access telecommunications and other things as well. So it's important that we understand how persons with disabilities use technology. And of course, part of this is to incorporate their contribution into the design process. I would also like to thank my management team for this continued support. They are there whenever I call on them, and especially Marlon and Asinat and Candice, who have disabilities and fully understand the challenges that we are trying to address. And so I definitely want to thank them, and to the rest of the team. They are there to support in whatever way is necessary. So just to quickly recap the bootcamp schedule, we've had 7 sessions so far. Today is the 8th, which is Tuesday, October 29th. And just to go over the learning outcomes and objectives, the goal of this bootcamp is to create an environment where software developers, educators, policymakers, persons with disabilities, and other stakeholders can all learn and interact and co-create while working on projects. And the goal here is to address the accessibility problems in the workplace. So just to quickly go over the course synopsis, we've already looked at why web accessibility matters. We've looked at the different types of disabilities and related challenges. We've looked at some of the assistive technologies and the methods used by persons with disabilities to access the web. We've also looked into some of the WCAG guidelines that help to define whether a website is accessible or not. We've looked at some of the skills and competencies needed to create accessible documents. And today we'll cover a little bit about the accessibility laws, and we will also look at an application that Ipsum Technologies is developing that would enable more persons to be able to access the internet. And of course, get equal opportunities in terms of job employment. So for this particular session, I will also be the guest speaker. And just to remind you all what Ipsum Technologies does, Ipsum Technologies is a social enterprise that is focused on creating opportunities for persons with disabilities to thrive in the growing digital economy. And again, for those of you who don't know me, I am Sean Melville and I'm the Managing Director. So I mentioned earlier that the business case for accessibility is extremely important when it comes to presenting your case and building support for any project ideas that you might have. And it's important that we understand how to develop that particular business case. And that means understanding a little bit about the statistics and about other areas in terms of inclusive design and the benefits that come with including accessibility in terms of the agenda and the strategic goals and policies of an organization. So I briefly want to look again at the problem. So one of the challenges that we will see worldwide is that there's an estimated 1 billion people around the world who have a disability. Now, the problem is not the people who have a disability, but the problem is that we don't design to accommodate persons who have a disability. And that means that essentially 1 in 7 people around the world are left out of the design process, and essentially it means that they are not catered for. And this leaves them particularly vulnerable to unemployment and poverty, because if it is that they can't access the information that they need, then it means that they're going to be not be able to access the opportunities that come with being able to to use the internet and other ICTs. So essentially, if we look a little bit closer and we look at the Caribbean, what we will see is that there's an estimated 15 million people around the world in the Latin American and Caribbean region that have a disability. And estimates in terms of unemployment is that of 80 to 90%. So it means that there's a whole lot of people who don't have access to job opportunities simply because they have a disability. And so we want to look a little bit more at that and address that particular problem. So in terms of disability, we need to understand the legal terminologies that are used by the UN. And so the UN has defined disability as persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. And so what we have to look at in terms of that definition is that the problem with disability is not necessarily the person, although we must acknowledge that there is some biological challenge that comes with having a disability. But it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because we should be catering in our designs for persons who have disabilities. And in terms of our business, we need to recognize that at some point in our lives, we too can become disabled. And so we need to understand that there's a wide spectrum of people who we have to cater to in terms of our business. And so therefore, we should be looking at how can we make whatever website or apps or technologies that we create ensure that it's accessible so that persons with disabilities are included in that particular target market or target audience. To dive a little bit deeper in terms of the UN, so the UN has the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and under Article 9, it covers a little bit more about accessibility, and it looks at the fact that we need to provide the appropriate technologies for persons with disabilities so that they have that equal access as everyone else. To recap, we've covered a lot of this in terms of there are 5 major categories of disability. And so we've looked at visual impairments, hearing, motor, speech, and cognitive impairments. And so there are a lot of different challenges which are unique to each type of disability. And so there's essentially no one size fits all solution. And that, of course, creates a challenge when it is you have to design for someone with a disability, because you may design a really good solution for one and not cater for another type of disability. So it's not necessarily possible to design efficiently for every type of disability, but we want to begin to think about the different types of disabilities. And then in our assessment of whatever we're doing, at least to say, here's what, this is what we've considered, and this was what we put in place in order to cater to those needs. And over time, we can improve on whatever measures that are in place. But if we don't think about it whatsoever, then that's where the problem is, because a lot of times the solutions themselves are very simple, but because people don't think about those particular problems or challenges that persons with disabilities face, they are often ignored. And so we want to address that. So why does accessibility matter? Well, we've mentioned earlier that there are over 1 billion people around the world who have a disability. And in the case of the US, that's over 56 million people. And in the Caribbean region, we've seen that there's over 50 million people within the Latin American and Caribbean that have some form of disability. Now, in the Caribbean, we don't particularly have laws, legal or laws that are enforced that prevent businesses from abusing or neglecting persons with disabilities. Where when we compare that with the US has clearly defined laws that help. And so over time, they have lawsuits that are being filed by persons with disabilities against, for example, websites and other companies because they haven't catered to the needs of persons with disabilities. We in the Caribbean have to take a slightly different approach because we need to understand that we haven't developed our human capital to the same level as the US. And so we need to be able to work with what we have and really and truly build awareness of the need to design for persons with disabilities and then attempt to put the appropriate measures in place in a more collaborative way so that we get persons with disabilities included in the design process so that it's not an add-on at the end of the whole design of any website or mobile app or any other form of technology that's being built, but we include them from the beginning, which makes it much more feasible. And at the end of it, we get the solution that we're looking for. So I just want to highlight a little bit more about what the specific business case is for digital accessibility. So there are 4 key things to look at. Business, digital accessibility in this case, you can look at innovation, you can look at how it enhances your brand, you can look at the market reach, and you can also look at it from a legal risk perspective. So in terms of innovation, accessibility, when you actually consider it, it drives innovation a little bit more because you add features that you won't necessarily think of adding if you weren't considering the needs of persons with disabilities. And in a lot of cases, it makes the product itself better. And so we need to look at how can digital accessibility create innovation within an organization and improve, to some extent, its competitive edge. We also have to look at diversity and inclusion and how that helps to identify a little bit more with the brand of the company. So when we interact with companies that cater to our needs and are a little bit more aware of the different cultures, it creates an opportunity for that brand to develop a relationship with the customer that they won't necessarily have developed because they didn't cater to the needs of persons with disabilities, and in some cases, their families. Another thing to look at, for example, is the actual size of the market. So we mentioned that there's over 1 billion people with a disability, and that represents, in terms of spending power, over $6 trillion. So it's not a small market and not something that we should ignore, because $6 trillion is quite a significant amount of money. And then in terms of legal risk, it depends on where you are in the world. It's important to understand that depending on what you're doing, you can be exposed to lawsuits. So just to go a little bit deeper into the drive innovation aspect of it. So when we cater to persons with disabilities and in terms of our design, the process of thinking it through helps us to understand a little bit more of the needs of persons with and without disabilities. And in some cases, when someone has a disability, they are able to speak to certain needs. And sometimes when we happen to become disabled, whether it's temporarily or permanent, if it is that a website or an application was designed with the needs of persons with disabilities in the first place, then it's an easier transition for us to use that software than if it was not accessible in the first place. Another thing we can look at is the design of the user interaction. So because this persons with disabilities sometimes use technology differently, it means that you have to cater for a wider range of human interactions. And so you have to look at take a human-centered approach, essentially, to understand the nature of the persons who are using it, and then all the different ways in which they may have to use that technology if they have a particular type of disability. We can also look at accessibility in terms of the usability, and sometimes it's a much better if you design something simple than if it's cognitively challenging. So for persons who have some form of mental or cognitive impairment, it's easier if it is that you create content that is simple and easy to read and has nice clear color contrast than if it was complex and verbose. And so I think overall, if we consider all of the people who could potentially use our products, we can make better designs. And then, of course, we could look at some of the innovations that have actually reached the market and look at who they were initially intended for. So, for example, the typewriter, the telephone, the punch cards, text-to-speech, email, voice controls, these were all essentially developed for persons with disabilities, but they have actually been adopted and have much broader application now. So what we can look at is the fact that when you create something that might seemingly be for one type of individual, it can have benefit to all of us. Within recent times, we've been seeing driverless cars, and that actually has the potential to help persons who are blind increase their independence, but it can also solve the problem of traffic fatalities and congestion. And so essentially, a lot of the technologies can be, helpful and overlap in different ways to improve on the quality of life for persons with disabilities and persons without disabilities. And another example could be, for example, the Artificial Retina Project, which looks at restoring the sight for participants who are blind, but could actually help future robots with real-time image processing systems, etc. And so, in fact, at IPSAM, we've been looking at how we could help blind persons be able to navigate. And so image processing is one of those areas that could essentially help with understanding what is in front of the individual and being able to identify it. So these are the types of innovation that we're looking at that could potentially improve the quality of life, not just for persons with disabilities, but people in general. So we can look at enhancing your brand. So for example, businesses have to protect and enhance their brands. And a lot of times we look at corporate social responsibility as being key. But I think it goes beyond corporate social responsibility and to some extent just being responsible in terms of how we do business. And so what we have to try and do is to cater to the diverse population. And so the more people we can target is the more lives we could touch. And therefore, and the more people we serve is the more money essentially that could be made by an organization. And so what we want to look at is how can you, through your business and through who you cater for, increase the reach of the organization through your branding. And so catering to persons with disabilities not just caters to them, but also to their families. Because if it is that the person with the disability, let's say they have to travel and there's one organization um, or travel agency or airline, etc., that caters to the needs of that person, then they could get the business versus another company. And so we have to look at how does it enhance your brand. The third area is in terms of market reach. So we've mentioned in the past that there's over 1 billion people around the world with some form of disability. And what we have to look at is that over time, that number is going to increase significantly because of increases in life expectancy and, of course, in terms of quality of life, etc. These things are all increasing the overall lifespan. And because of that, we have an increasing number of persons who are becoming elderly. And of course, with age comes disability. And so we have to look at how can we cater to the needs of persons who, in this case, may be over 70, may be having some form of challenge accessing the same houses that they're living in, access to the same computers that they may have used before. Now we have to design according to their particular disabilities. And it may not be as severe as someone who has, let's say, for instance, entirely lost their vision, but it's important to understand it. And so, my grandmother was one of those cases. I remember having to take care of her, going down into her 70s, into her 80s. She went from being a very strong woman in the garden, doing all of her work, to being, in a wheelchair, losing her vision and needing help. And so it's important to understand that as we get older, we lose a lot of the strength. So when a business is looking to cater to a target market, they need to understand that sometimes those customers that they would have had are now going to age over time. And so if they want to continue getting business from those customers, they need to have accessibility built into their business processes. And that might mean having an accessible website or an accessible. And just to close off this, in terms of the market reach and the size of the market, it's estimated that at least $2.3 billion people control an over $6.9 trillion annually in terms of disposable income. And so 2.3 billion people may in some way be affected by disability, but essentially about just 1 billion people have a severe enough disability that we count it as something that prevents them from being able to work. But we need to look at the size of the market, and it's not insignificant. All right. So the last area that we'll look at is the minimizing the legal risk. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, we don't have such a high level of risk in terms of legality and being sued. But it's important to understand the trends because eventually, once we catch up, we are going to be impacted by lawsuits. And if we want to do business internationally, we also need to be aware of the legal implications of having inaccessible websites, etc. So just to touch a little bit on the legal aspect of it again, We've looked at the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and this, of course, was passed by the General Assembly of the United Nations and was ratified by over 175 countries by 2018. And it's important to understand that because they are the ones who are setting the guidelines for all of the nations of the world. So once we understand what is in that document, we can then align our businesses to suit. Another guideline that is a little bit more technical, but also legal, is the WCAG 2.2, 2.1 guidelines. And I say legal and technical because a lot of the different regulations cite conformance to the WCAG guidelines to ensure that you are meeting the essential web accessibility standards. So being familiar with those guidelines would help. And a lot of the accessibility tools have automated checks that follow those guidelines. In terms of the US, they have a policy called Section 508, compliance, which identifies what it means for digital accessibility to, especially when it comes to businesses having compliant websites and compliant apps. And they also have the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's a little bit more broad and all-encompassing, but essentially, in terms of digital accessibility, it talks about making work, place accommodations, and ensuring that websites and other things are accessible. Then in terms of Europe, there's the European Commission, which adopted the European Accessibility Act. And then to bring it closer to Trinidad and Tobago, we have the guidelines for employers on disability in Trinidad and Tobago. And this doesn't necessarily cover digital accessibility, but it covers a lot in terms of workplace accommodation and physical changes that may need to be made for persons with disabilities. But hopefully it will incorporate accessibility, digital accessibility in the future. And then what you can also look at is the revised national policy on persons with disabilities and to see where we're heading in terms of the legal aspect of it, legal and policy, in terms of how we move forward, treating with persons with disabilities. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of the cost of exclusion? Well, if we don't cater for persons with disabilities, there's an economic loss to society. And it's been estimated that there's a loss between 3 and 7% of GDP. And what we also look at is that there's a cycle that takes place where disability leads to poverty and poverty leads to disability. And if we do not have provisions in place, what we can find ourselves in is a spiral where our population is not able to work and be able to access the same opportunities as other countries that have put things in place, whether it's social mechanisms, etc., to help persons with disabilities and to enforce regulations that prevent businesses from not catering to their needs. So what we have to look at is that disability has a significant economic and social impact on persons with disabilities and on their families. And it means that we have to address those challenges. And how do we do that? We have to look at, for example, the employment rates. And we need to look at ways in which we can create more employment opportunities for persons with disabilities to use their skills. So it then begs the question, why should you hire someone with a disability? And so I've just highlighted a couple of things here. So hiring persons with disabilities can in fact positively impact a company's bottom line. Persons with disabilities in fact represent an untapped resource of skills and talent. And so many of them, they're very, very skillful at what they do. I'll actually share a little bit more in terms of a particular individual who I know. She's very good at animation and she has cerebral palsy. And she of course, will face many challenges. But I'm just highlighting her case because she's so good at animation, and yet still she will find herself in many challenges because of the fact that she has a disability. And so we want to look at that as how can we create opportunities that would allow for persons with disabilities to achieve their full capacity and to live the dreams that they have, just like everyone else who doesn't have a disability. So persons with disabilities, as I mentioned, represent a multi-billion dollar market segment. And so we need to look at, how do you tap into that market? How do you get persons with disabilities to work for you as well as to buy your products and services? And then another thing that you could look at is that if you hire someone with a disability as an employee, they understand firsthand what the needs are of whatever product or service that you're offering. So rather than hire someone without a disability, maybe as a consultant, to try and figure out all these problems, you could just hire someone with a disability who, of course, has some training in terms of design and who would be able to speak to the needs of other persons with disability because they have lived the experience. So if it is that you're hiring someone with a disability, it means that you need to also have some reasonable accommodation built in. So what is that? Essentially, reasonable accommodation is a change to a job or working environment that would enable a person with a disability to apply, to perform, and to advance in job functions or undertake training. And so what we have to transition from is not saying, okay, someone has a disability, so they can't do this job, but attempt to figure out what can we do in terms of making those reasonable accommodations. So maybe it might mean providing them with additional training um, so that they understand how to use, for example, screen readers effectively to do their jobs. Perhaps it might mean uh, creating a wider workspace for someone who might be in a wheelchair, or equipping them with the ability to work from home. So we have to look at is what can an employer do that would allow them to hire someone with a disability so that they are not excluded from participating in society and especially in the economic production that is necessary in order for us to generate wealth. So in terms of the market potential, with more than 1 billion people living in the world with a disability, it's therefore essential that whatever technology is developed actually fosters digital inclusion. And so what we have to look at is how can we cater to the various types of disabilities. And when you look at how the market is changing, you're seeing that, okay, there's at least $500 billion in value within the market. You could look at, in terms of trends, societal shifts, where we are moving towards greater inclusion of persons with disabilities, and that's an exceptionally good thing. And then you can also look at, again, the increase in sales and the brand recognition when you cater to persons with disabilities, because when they get access to your products and services and they find it easy, they tell other persons. And so, you are seen as an organization that actually cares about their needs. So it's important that we understand how this works. So essentially, accessibility is good for business. And what we're seeing internationally, this is a quote by Paul Smythe, he's the head of digital accessibility at Barclays. He says, many organizations are waking up to the fact that embracing accessibility leads to multiple benefits: reducing legal risks, strengthening brand presence, improving customer experience, and colleague productivity. That's an exceptionally good thing. But around the world, we're seeing that that might be happening, but in the Caribbean, we tend to recognize that we're very slow to change and to adopt international standards and best practices. So my hope is that, coming out of this boot camp and out of this presentation in particular, that we will begin to see why accessibility is good for business and to actually begin making those changes by with accommodating or starting projects that would include persons with disabilities in the workplace and looking to find ways in which we can hire more persons with disabilities to do jobs based on their skill sets. So I just want to share a presentation that I did in South Korea, and this was about a young lady called Chanel Smith, and essentially we were developing a platform that would help persons like her to be able to access job opportunities online. And so I'll just share briefly by playing this video a little bit about what that particular presentation was on.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sean Melville, and I'm the Managing Director of Ipsum Technologies. Our mission is to improve the quality of life for persons with disabilities by increasing access to digital technologies that promote independent living and encourage equal participation in society. Now, I want to tell you a brief story about Chanel Smith. Chanel is an aspiring 3D animator from my home country in Trinidad and Tobago. She is 20 years of age and she has a disability. Her disability is cerebral palsy, and as a result of that, she has several difficulties getting access to jobs. Chanel is extremely talented, as you can see. That's one of her art pieces for the animation. And she's at a huge disadvantage in that most employers are not necessarily going to hire her in preference to anyone else. Consequently, she's probably not going to be able to really live out her dreams and to share the same opportunities like someone who doesn't have a disability. But do you know that 1 in 7 people around the world have a disability? And like Chanel, that totals to over 1 billion people. As a result of that, I have spoken with several persons who, like Chanel, have many disabilities at home. And the one thing that they all have in common is that the challenge of being able to access employment is one that restricts them from being able to truly live their lives. And so they find themselves dependent on friends and family, and in some cases, they're confined to a life of poverty. But I think the solution is simple. What if we were able to connect persons with disabilities to jobs online? Jobs that you're not patronizing them for. It's actual real jobs that they can do because they have the talent. And so my company, we've been working on a platform called Empowered that really and truly will create opportunities. But of course, this platform has to be built accessible. So what do I mean by accessible? Well, for persons who are blind, it has to be built in such a way that it uses a screen reader can interpret it. For persons who are deaf, it has to have a relay service that can connect someone who wants to work with someone who's deaf in a way that they can understand, so someone who can do sign language. So what do I need? I need developers. I need developers who understand accessibility. I also need social impact investors who understand the challenges and are willing to put money not into a charity. This is not a charity, but rather into an investment in people. People who, like us here in this room, have aspirations, have dreams, and want to make a difference. and do not want to be seen as a charity case. So, with that, I conclude. Thank you.
Round of applause. And please go to your Menti.com, use code 405817 to vote for Sean.
Okay, great. So that was just a little bit about the Empowered project that we're working on, and I'll share a little bit more as we go along, just to close off the presentation in terms of what I'm doing and how it's going to help with respect to creating employment for persons with disabilities. So the presentation that you just saw was called Empowered. And what Empowered is, it's an e-work solution for persons with disabilities. Essentially, what we're developing is a virtual platform that will enable persons with disabilities to provide their services online to other businesses and employers. And the goal here is to create those opportunities for persons like Chanel to access opportunities to do, for example, animation, graphic design, web development, audio engineering, etc. Because a lot of persons that I know of with disabilities, they have those skills. And those skills have a lot of value to them in that you can offer your services and you can offer it anywhere in the world, and you can get a huge return for your time once you have good skills that you can demonstrate in terms of your quality and in terms of how quickly you can do the work. So I think that by creating this platform, if we can connect those persons with disabilities to other businesses that have those types of job opportunities, and those job opportunities may not necessarily be in Trinidad, but they may be in other countries like the US, Canada, Australia, India, etc., where there is a market essentially. And I believe that once we can bridge that gap, we can actually get persons with disabilities offering their services to anyone, anywhere in the world. And that's a significant achievement once we're able to accomplish that particular goal. So I just want to share another video quickly before I end. This one is a video of the prototype that we're developing, and it will share a little bit more about how it will work and in terms of why this is important for persons with disabilities. And so you'll hear from a number of persons who, in this case, are visually impaired, and their particular understanding of how technology has helped them. And then you'll hear a little bit more from Balan talking about how the platform will work.
When I got blind 2 years ago, it was one of the most horrifying things in my life.
I have been blind for 6 years. I got blind on April 1st, April Fool's Day, 2011, and it was not a joke apparently.
One of the ways I got friends in school, I felt that they were very uncomfortable that they was a blind person. So I say, make fun of your disability. That's me. That's for me, eh? Mm-hmm. And it worked for me.
Because from being a radio and TV technician, fixing TV and radio for the better part of my life, and just to go blind. It was scary, because which way is up, I don't know. What next?
You understand? And I'm studying. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I have another one on the way. How I go and see about my family? How I go and see my children? And I cry in front of the hospital, not like a baby, eh? I cry like a big man.
So my encouragement is to really not give up on your dreams. Although we are physically challenged, we are blind, we have dreams, and my encouragement is to really pursue your dreams in spite of all the challenges and all the things they say we can't do.
I'm a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. I have been a police officer for 16 years, and I've been blind for 6. I thought I would have lost my job, but because of technology, I did not. Our latest project is Empower, a web-based initiative that creates employment opportunities for persons with disabilities.
If you employ someone who's visually impaired, because we understand how difficult it is to get another job for ourselves, it's hard to get one anyway.
You'll have somebody who will hold on for their life because just getting a job that pays well is so rare that you're going to have a loyal person.
You'll find someone who will want to come to work early, would want to please, would want to work hard because they understand the importance of a job.
So, how does it all look? Well, you simply go online and create your user profile. You pay a small subscription fee on a very accessible website. Soon, you can begin to search for job opportunities by potential clients. Every job transaction has a small commission fee. There is no limit to what you can earn. It's that simple.
Okay. So I'd just like to conclude the presentation with a quote from Vince Cerf. It says, "To think that you can apply some kind of magic pixie dust and make a technology accessible to people with a disability after it is designed is just crazy." And so what I'm hoping to do, and I'm hoping that I was able to accomplish it with this bootcamp series, was to get people thinking a little bit more about digital accessibility and how can we include persons with disabilities in the design stage so that at the end of it, when we create a particular product, whether it's a website or an app, that it will be built accessible from the beginning. So with that, I'd like to conclude. Anyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. You can unmute your mics, let me know what are your thoughts, and essentially, what are your next steps? What have you taken away from this bootcamp that you can apply to your work? So just provide me a little bit of feedback and okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna unmute everyone. Okay, I see Karen unmuted himself. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Question now regarding the Empowered project.
Sure.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
like that idea because I like the idea. So for example, for persons who even if you could probably have no navigation challenges, but it's still you could sit at the comfort of your home at the comfort of your where and use your computer and work. But then you probably need, I don't know, I'm just asking, you probably need to get what, like businesses and companies to come on board
Yes, that is
as well.
correct. Yeah, so we need to
Yeah.
connect with other businesses. And I mean, I have been doing work for companies, so it's possible that we can start there, where we get some of the companies that I have already done some jobs for, and those who have networked with to provide those type of job opportunities, and then we could expand and see how we could advertise for more companies to come on board. But
Yeah.
I do see where you're coming from, because it doesn't have to have a mobility challenge for you to benefit from a platform like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, you could probably you could probably do it as a sideline job as well too, even a person with disability.
Yeah.
And and if so, for example, you have a blind, talking in perspective of somebody who's blind
Mm-hmm.
coder, a web page designer, developer. So he or she will probably go, when they sign on to the website, create user account, profile, etc. And let's say a company hires that person to, let's say, build a website. So essentially what will happen is I know I'm asking again, what you'll do the website, and let's say the person is in Trinidad and the person who needs it is in, let's say, US.
Mm-hmm.
So they will do the website and then send it across to them via link, or create everything and post it everything, host as well.
Okay, so the interesting thing about websites is that once you have a web host and you publish it, it's live anywhere in the world. So depending
Right.
upon who is hosting it will determine, okay, for example, if the company hired you to host the site, then
Right.
you would be hosting it. But if they retain the rights to the hosting, what they'd have to give you is a login, and then you would log into their backend and build out the site. So it depends, but that's more like a contractual agreement rather than a specific keys that will be set in
Yeah.
stone, essentially.
Right. 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 Yeah, it's nice because this girl is Chanel. Is her name Chanel?
Yeah, Chanel.
Yeah. That create nice opportunities for even the person with disability in general.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So that's the goal. And I mean, I've interacted with so many persons with disabilities that have such a range of skills that it for me when I looked at it, I was like, this is key. We need to get more people employed. That's going to solve most of the problems because
That is the thing.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
We
Um,
have,
go ahead. Yeah,
we have, can you hear me?
yeah. Go ahead. You can say
Yeah,
what you want
Sean
to say.
Cecile here. How you
Hmm.
going? We have a lot of young up and coming differently able persons. I could say more, for example, for example, we know in the visually impaired community, a lot, like I know of one who has his master's degree in info technology, right?
Right. Yeah.
Karen, you know who we're talking about, right? Anil, right? Anil Wait,
Yes.
right?
Still.
And we also have others, we have fallen along in his footstep as well. And then too, it have persons who hearing impaired and who wheelchair bound are good with technology. And I'm saying, why is it so we have so much raw talent with technology? Why are we not utilizing them? And I find it's so I don't know, it's so unfair, and people underestimate us all the time. But even though you get into the job market from experience, you're still undermined and undermined by able-bodied persons. Like they watch some of them watching you to fail, but it has some who will believe in you, who want you
Right.
to do good. And that has been my experience, working in the world of, with persons who are able-bodied and whatnot. We have so much talented people in our community, Karen, and I just find it so sad and unfair. Um, why companies and even agencies should take them in, because they're very talented. They're really really good,
You see, some persons.
and these are people in IT.
Yeah, yeah, some persons probably not realizing that we persons who have that disability want to contribute to society.
Yes, and that's
Yes,
it.
and
That's a
you
challenge.
see,
Yeah.
being an awareness officer in Pavi, when I meet normal persons on the street and whatnot, they say, "Oh, I listen, some of us have our master's degree. Some of us are very talented." I say, "But how come you all are getting so much trouble to get into the job market?" And people are amazed of our talent, and they want to know. Just some people just don't know, but it's just awareness. The whole thing is awareness. Yeah.
Okay. So, Cecile, I understand where you're coming from because, there's so many opportunities, but a lot of times because of the perception that someone with a disability can't do the job, it's given to someone who you think might be more,
Mhm.
able to do it. And that's a flawed perception. And so I'm also thinking as well that persons with disabilities need to speak up a little bit
Mhm.
more and not just show up for jobs, but try to create their own jobs as well. Right? The same way Marlon was able to go
Exactly, yes.
and go to Startup Weekend and see what he wanted to do is just to speak up a little bit more and try to collaborate. Even if you don't have all the skills yourself, you could find persons to work with who
Agreed.
can help you get started. So that's just my little 2 cents on that particular perspective.
I agree with you 100%. And that is what we need to do. We need to, despite our little differences, all of us, we need to work together and work with each other. We need each other during this time.
Mhm.
You know, we really need each other as young persons. We need to help out each other. That is so true.
Yes. And just to
Sean,
give you guys, yeah, I was going to share a little bit in terms of what's next with this particular project. So, in fact, in November, in a couple of days' time, I'll be going to Saudi Arabia to present this idea to investors at the Entrepreneurship World Cup. So, I'm hoping that as we go
Very
along, I can get
good.
yeah,
some
good, man.
feedback for us to
Yeah, yeah.
include in that presentation because it's important that we understand what do people want. And so this is in a way, this is the opportunity to say, this is what this platform should be doing for persons with disabilities to some extent.
Mhm.
Karen, you're going to say something?
Okay. Oh, before, yeah, I was gonna say, is it possible to reach out to like sector, public sector, the job, the employers, the companies, and reach out with, like,
Mention
yeah,
labor.
and right, and say, okay, we have a group of person
I know.
with disabilities, have talent, show them the skills, etc., and show them they could get the job done, and let them change their mindset. Because companies look at, well, oh boy, this person has a disability. What I'm coming here for? If they get sick, well, so show them the bigger picture, not look at the disability, but look at the person who has it,
Exactly.
that has the talent. Is it possible, Sean, to contact, like, or communicate with, you understand where I'm going?
Yes, yes, yes. So I believe
Private
it,
sector.
yeah, it is possible to do it. So
Get
once
that.
you come together and you say, okay, I'm offering these services, you can then approach a company or a group of companies and say, this is what I can offer you. And it's not different really and truly for persons with disabilities and persons without disabilities. It's just that you have to organize yourself
Mhm.
to be able to do so. Yeah. You see,
Okay.
some of the part of the challenge with lobbying is that it requires you to have strength in numbers. So if it is that you form yourself into a group and that group is sizable enough, I believe you'll be able to make a much bigger impact than if you went singly or you form a small group and you say, okay, well, this is our thing and
And
this is what we're doing.
people who are serious also,
True. And if you go with some technologies, like Sean,
because yeah, no, you see, we had to get people very serious because they'll do one thing and then they'll do the other. What this be, Karen? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And yes, and you're very right with that because persons with disabilities, just like people without disabilities, will do whatever. Sometimes they may show up and they
mhm.
do good work, and then sometimes they don't. So you want to find reliable people, who
Yep,
have skills
that's
and
correct.
who will produce good work for the job.
And very like-minded and serious persons. Because I really, really want to see that. Because I'm looking at the others who are coming out of secondary school very soon. We have to fight for them the same way how the others fight for us with education, and we need to fight for the new generation with jobs and whatnot.
Yes, right. But of
So we need
course,
to do that.
a
If
lot of that lies in your hands because you have the knowledge now, so you
Yeah.
need to take a step forward and determine, okay, what can I do to change the way things are?
Mm-hmm. So this is a lot to think about.
Definitely. So, any other thoughts? Anybody have any questions regarding the presentation itself, the ideas that I shared?
As you was talking about earlier, related to the legality. For
Mm-hmm.
example, websites and so on in the Caribbean. Next thing you know, it trending in the US and so on. And we like to, let's say, what, when sneeze with catchy cold.
Yes,
So next
yes,
thing
we might catch
we start to sue people in this place for inaccessible websites and apps.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, next thing you take people to court of justice for
You
that.
understand?
That will be something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but it is going to take us a little while to get there because we need to develop the
Mm-hmm.
capacity of the people to be able to do accessible websites.
Mm-hmm.
In the US, as you say, the skills are there because they have Silicon Valley, they
Mm.
have people who are well trained, and so sometimes it's just a matter of them applying themselves and taking into consideration the needs. But in the Caribbean, because we don't have as many people who are even trained to develop applications, far less to develop ones that are accessible, we need to be cognizant of that before we, take a legal road to correcting, this challenge because we can end up with more problems than solutions. Um, but
Yeah.
essentially, yeah,
Because yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
No,
So
agreed. Yeah.
I'm hoping that, over time, as people learn a little bit more about accessibility and that we, be able to, I would say, form partnerships with people outside of the Caribbean who have the skills and that, knowledge transfer can take place,
Mm-hmm.
then we will be able to address the accessibility issues.
Sean, we have an app out.
You're having a what? Just repeat yourself.
Sorry, Sean. Accidentally.
Sorry.
Yeah, Sean, we have an app part too.
A part two, well, I would love to. I have to talk to the Secretary General and see what she says.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
We should. I think you should, yeah.
And I would love to be able to connect with much more people internationally because I know that there's a lot of information out there and we need people to share that information. And also, I think that we have a lot of locals who have knowledge that could also be shared. So if you know anyone that you think can contribute in a way that would improve the quality of the presentations that we've had so far, just send me an email with a contact or tell them to contact me and we could have a conversation around that.
Mhm. That's good.
Hi everyone, this is Ronaldo.
Good
Hey,
night,
Ronaldo.
Arnaldo. Yeah.
And I guess what's been on my mind has been like thinking about really just like practical to design that's accessible. And so I'm thinking about maybe like future iterations, specifically around digital accessibility, but definitely, I mean, I guess digital accessibility is what I'll say there. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking around like boot camps that may be like boot camps for web developers locally and within the region. Um, boot camps around for employers for how they should seek development for their own website, like and yeah. just that
Okay.
sort of thing that like moves us one step for having what they need to
Right. So I think yes, we could do that. I could talk to the SG and see if she would be interested in it. She does have some connections with Google and Facebook, so it might be possible for us to do a boot camp with those
I was
organizations
thinking about
to
boot
support
camp
it.
for parents with children, especially like children with disabilities or children who visually impaired.
Oh, okay, so you're looking at a younger age. That's interesting. We could look into that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, of
Yeah.
course. I think boot camp that could be targeted to persons living with disabilities so that they become skilled labor force that, that improves the way in which technology are being implemented
Yes.
across industries with the even, for me, it's like, it's two of those things. Like you have boot camp that target existing developers, persons living with and without so it affects the industry now, but also prepare this to transform industry towards the future. So they're both, both great.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you on Aldo. We definitely need some tailored workshops and boot camps that could help, and then we also need to have those that we could you know cross the divide and have persons with disabilities working together with persons without disabilities so that there's communication amongst the different groups.
I guess like at the top of my head is, do you know whether the state is required to make accessible website?
Whether the state, so the state,
like the Republic of Tobago, like all of them. Because
right?
I know that they're not all accessible.
Okay. So right, so they're not all accessible. Now the state has signed off to the convention, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. So that obligates them to make things accessible, right? Especially state websites. But the thing about these conventions is that even though they are obligated on paper, they're not necessarily mandated to follow through on any particular timeline. And so that, it makes it a little bit difficult to say, okay, well, yes, they must be doing this because, it's enforced by the UN. What has to happen to some extent is that the state has to pass laws, and then those laws, like how the US has laws, would then be enforced by the judicial system, right? Yeah. So that's a challenge. But we are creating policies, and some of the policies are targeted at persons with disabilities, and some are not necessarily targeted, but by the implementation of it, for example, the ICT blueprint that is being developed, it does touch a little bit on accessibility and providing opportunities for persons with disabilities, but it's not extensive. So what we need is, we need more people to lobby and raise the awareness.
A lot. Of course, I know I say the word practical a lot, but it's really because the language of accessibility can be there in a policy, etc., but it doesn't mean that the decision makers necessarily understand, know that they are doing less than is required.
Well, that is a very true statement. And a lot of times the problem with policymakers, I would say, in terms of doing their jobs, is that they don't have the knowledge of the technology itself or the technical skills. So they may think, okay, well, this is accessible, but it really doesn't translate into it being accessible. They may think, okay, this project that we're going to implement is going to yield results, but there's no benchmark that we could work with because they don't have the skills. And so we need, I would say, the reason why I did this boot camp is because it takes more than just the persons with disabilities or the policymakers or the designers or the developers individually. It takes us collectively understanding each other so that we can define accessibility. Because the person with the disability, they may have they may be able to say, okay, this website does not work for me, I can't use it, but they may not necessarily know how to design the website, right? And similarly, the person who is a designer or a developer for a website or for a book, etc., they know how to design, but they can't really say, well, this is accessible because they don't have the disability and they haven't been trained on terms of how to
They
make
haven't
their work
trained.
accessible. Right.
Yeah, that's typically the challenge in my experience, is that in many people in the creative industries without adequate training. And so I have the privilege of having studied and specifically studied in relation to the health sector, which got me into designing accessible technologies.
Right.
And so I end up working with peers who may have been et cetera, who or their program of study just didn't include, wasn't accessible. These aren't considerations in their day-to-day practice. They just make
Right.
sense for able-bodied folks.
Yeah. And designers, I mean, I think a lot of work goes in, especially from a psychological perspective, into design. So designers are in fact stressed a lot of times because they're trying to cater to the broadest possible market, and there's a lot of creativity that goes into it because you want to, you want to create a message, you want to send this message, and it can't be like the last design that I did. Is you want to come up with something unique each time, and that doesn't necessarily go well for someone who has a cognitive challenge and who's trying to understand what exactly you're doing. And so, to some extent, I totally understand designers and I totally understand the persons with disabilities, the challenges that we would have in terms of accommodating each other, because because as a designer, you want to create something that looks really, really good. You want to impress to some extent, or you want to share the message, and you want to encode it in a way that doesn't look like the last design that you did.
Right, and I hear that.
Yeah.
I understand that, but I'm also a designer and I'm a design educator.
Yeah.
And I want to challenge any opposition that designing accessible work is at compromise of creativity. It is not.
Right.
I think in design accessible is one, your duty as a good designer, and two, will never compromise on your creativity.
I agree with you on that. It's just a matter of how do you do it? How do you ensure that you reach that sweet spot where you understand how your particular design is going to be internalized by the widest possible audience. And that's I think for maybe not for you, you may have an understanding because you're aware of it, but for a lot of other designers, they may not necessarily see, okay, well, this particular size of font or the way in which this particular layout is structured, it may not necessarily work well for the person with disability, but the other persons who don't have a disability might love it, right? So it's understanding those challenges, and sometimes you may not get a design that works for everyone, so you may have to create multiple versions of that design.
Right. Certainly, you don't get it for everyone, but you do. One of the things that I do, I try to ensure that I train people who want to have the capacity to recognize other people's needs and
Yes.
also can seek to educate. I think typically as a designer, you do part of your job is educating your client why you are making sense, and those decisions should be ones that include accessibility.
Yes, yes. That is true. I mean, you definitely have to educate your client, and I would say accessibility is one of those key components that you need to bring into the equation, right? And so that I'm hoping that at the end of this bootcamp, that more people would see it that way and say, okay, we're doing this project, and let's see how we can ensure that whatever we're doing at the end of it will target the broadest possible market, and that would of course include persons with disabilities.
That's good.
All right, thanks, Arnaldo. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, I'm seeing Lisa, I'm seeing Richard. Who else? Anybody wants to share their thoughts? This is the last session that we're gonna have on the boot camp. I'm hoping that we can get to do another boot camp session, but for now, this is the amount of time that we have. So let me know what your last thoughts are, and you know what you might wish. Tell me what you want to do. Would you like to see another boot camp session? Let me know.
Good night.
Hi, Lisa. Good night.
Hello. Hi, good night. I'm sorry, I joined tonight's session a bit late. Sorry about that, but the entire course, the bootcamp series, has been excellent, and I do look forward to if there's more to come. But no, it has been great. I have learned. Just enjoy learning from the persons who have presented and those who have participated, who have given feedback, who have asked questions, who have shared their experiences and ideas and things. It has all been great, and thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lisa, and for sharing that. And I do hope that we could do another version of the bootcamp.
Yes.
Does anybody else have anything else to say? Any parting thoughts?
Hey, Sean,
Yes, Karen.
what about like having one doing the accessibility training persons to do accessibility testing?
Or to do accessibility testing? Okay, I can look into
bootcamp.
that and see how we can get that going, because I know this was a very generalized training, and yeah, I could actually talk with Alan and see, you know, what we can do, because DQ has a number of tools that I think could be very useful for teaching designers and developers. And for anyone else who wants to get involved and to say that, let's say we could test this website or this particular app, or you want to be a usability tester yourself, and then yes, we can look into that.
Sean, I think we should look at this app I told you about when it comes. I think you should look at it to see what you think about it.
The TTPS app?
Yeah.
Okay. I
It's
will.
coming out when Saturday.
Yes, Saturday, I think. Yeah.
Sean, Lisa again. I was just thinking, I would know if you plan to, but I'm hoping that we can continue the group interaction, relevant information with each other.
Oh, sure, yes,
At the
of
end
course.
of this
Yeah, you should leave the WhatsApp
You mean the
group.
WhatsApp group?
boot camp.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean the
yeah,
end of the
that'll be
interaction.
Yes, yes. So I will leave the WhatsApp group open, and as I get more information, you know, opportunities, etc., I would share it with you all, because there's so
If
many.
you have any questions, you can share it here.
Okay. Yeah, so there are opportunities, I would say, for you to get your own projects going. So let's say, for example, you want to do, you want to develop an application that does something. I don't know what you think it might be a need that you have, and you want to cater to someone else who might have a disability. It could be similar to yours, it could be a different type. There are grant programs, there are competitions, there are fellowships that can support you in that along that journey. And so I will share a lot more in terms of that, because I think those are opportunities that are underutilized by people in the Caribbean. And I would say I've been very fortunate to have gotten several fellowships where, in fact, you get, whether it's full or partial sponsorship, and sometimes you go to different countries, or you might get the funding for your project. So keep your eyes open, come up with your ideas, try to define them as best as you can. If you need help, just call me and I can see how I can assist you with defining the projects. But there are a lot of opportunities out there. And specifically, if it is you're talking about disability, the United Nations and several of the international organizations have set aside funding for those types of projects. So just keep your eyes out. I would tell you, subscribe to the IDB, to the UN, also subscribe to the World Bank and to USAID. They will send you newsletters on a either daily, sometimes weekly basis, depending. And once you are actively looking at the opportunities that they're sending you, you can then determine which ones are worth your time applying to.
So, Sean, thank you for organizing this with your entire team. And it was great having a class with everyone who's been a part of it and meeting you on the field trip. And yeah, I'll stay in touch.
All right, thanks, Arnaldo. Thanks for your support and for coming out to the field trip as well. And so I hope that you and everyone will benefit from it. I am going to share some of the videos that we took on the field trip, and we're also producing a short promotional video for it. So I will send that as soon as it's done. I will share it in the group, and I will also share it via email.
Okay.
Okay, great. So if there are no further questions, I will. We
No,
can
comment,
conclude. Oh, comment? Go ahead, Karen.
No, comment from Karen. Yeah, well, just want to thank you very much, you and your team, for these 8 sessions, lovely sessions. I mean, personally, really learned a lot, really benefited. And I always say, you're never too late or never too old to learn. You're always learning new stuff. And
yes, you learn every day.
definitely, as I said before, I was greatly a great beneficiary from this product. These 8 sessions. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Karen. And I know we will definitely be talking further. So, whether we have another version or we you're working on another project, we will be in contact.
Yes, we will be in contact.
Okay.
And
So
today was the information you just shared was really good as well today. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sean.
All right, Cecile, thank you for, for attending and for being such an active participant as well. And I know we will be in contact going forward. Let me know what your ideas are, because I know you have a lot. So let's see how we can actually work together as well.
Looking forward to doing that.
All right, cool. So just want to thank everyone for coming out to the last session. And I do hope that you all will have a good night. And, as we proceed, I hope that you all are able to take away from this and actually implement, what you've learned in your jobs and on any projects that you might start for yourselves. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you, everyone, and do have a good night.
You too, Sean.
All right.
Karen.
Yeah, good night, everybody.
Good night. It was nice meeting everyone, and we'll contact.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, guys. I'm going to close it off.
Bye. Yeah.